Hello and welcome to today's webinar, What Database Recovery Looks Like with Modern Data Protection. This event is brought to you in partnership with Rubric, and we are glad to have you. Thank you so much for joining us. This is going to be a fun event. We've got a presentation as well as a live demo. So you're in the right place if you want to learn about protecting your databases with the best, most innovative data protection solution in the industry today. Before we get started, just a few things that you should know about the event. First off, my name is David Davis of Actual Tech Media, and I'll be serving as the moderator. We want this to be educational, as we do with all of our events here at Actual Tech Media. So we encourage you to use the questions panel there in your audience console. I can call your attention to it that way. Of course, we appreciate all the good morning and hello messages from across the United States and around the world, but we also want your technical questions on this topic. So as you're watching the presentation and the demo, if you have questions about, hey, does it do this, or would it work for that, or can it protect this, that's the place to ask, and we'll be queuing up the best questions for our Q&A session. We also have a link there in the handouts tab to Rubrik.com for more information. And then at the end of the webinar today, we'll be announcing the winner of our Amazon $300 gift card door prize. If you're watching this on demand, of course, the drawing has already occurred. The prize terms can be found in the handouts tab. And then new for this year, we've started doing our best question prize to help shake some questions loose, if you will. If you have a question on your mind, you're not quite sure if you should ask it, go ahead and ask it, and that will enter you into the best question drawing. The prize winner will be selected after the event and will be contacted via email. Of course, you also have to meet the same prize policy. And with that, it's time to go ahead and kick off the event. I'm excited to introduce you to Mr. Sean McElhenney, Oracle Solutions Architect at Rubric. Sean, it's great to have you on.
Thank you, David. I appreciate the time. As David mentioned, my name's Sean McElhenney, Oracle Solutions Architect here at Oracle-related DBA for 20 plus years, dealing a lot with Oracle's package technology, mainly their EBS suite and whatnot. But I've also supported all sorts of other Oracle databases, so I've got a pretty good grasp on how the Oracle database works and how some of the other larger industry databases such as SQL Server and whatnot work. And today, hopefully, we'll be able to dig in a little deeper into what you as a DBA should be looking for out of a modern data protection solution. So here's your quick intro. I hope you're in the right place. I appreciate your interest, and let's dig into the content. Quick walkthrough of what we're going to go over today. Well, we'll talk a little bit about what modern data protection really is. Meat and potatoes of the content is going to be around recovery. So let's talk about what recovery needs are, things you should consider, and what are some modern recovery options you should really be looking at. Then we'll go into a couple different scenarios that you may have encountered in the workplace, or you may have heard of other people encountering, and compare them based on how a legacy system might interact with it and what you should expect a modern data protection solution to interact with. And we'll wrap up with, if we have enough time, with a quick demo and then some Q&A. So let's get right to the content. All right, so before we can talk about recovery, let's talk about what modern data protection is and why you should really care. So modern data protection has been thrown around quite a bit lately. Really, what should you as a consumer be assessing when you're looking at solutions that are touting this? First and foremost, you need the ability to protect your data wherever it resides, whether it's in your data center, on the cloud, or in a series of flat files or in a database. We all know and have seen that data is growing exponentially. Some of you may experience this in your current work environment. So the ability of your solution to scale to meet this need is critical. We also need to be able to reduce complexity and the learning curve by providing a single pane of glass view for your protected objects and provide a consistent look and feel across the solution. Next, the ability of the product to meet or exceed industry standard security and compliance requirements is pretty important, should be a big thing that you're looking for. The solution's got to be resilient. Your protected objects should be retrievable from your local site, a DR site, the cloud, or anywhere in between. We've got, CI/CD methodologies that require tooling that can easily be automated and integrated into existing tool sets. So you really want to look for an API-first solution. Your tooling should really be capable of easing your transition to the cloud, right? You may not be there yet, but it's a pretty good chance that there's somebody in your organization that's really thinking about it and evaluating whether it's going to be a value-add option for you. And lastly, it should really be able to handle your recovery needs with ease. Ironic, speaking of recovery needs, this is what we're focusing on today. So it makes sense to ask, well, when do I need to recover? There's a few primary scenarios that we can really consider. Data loss, so you've lost a particular set of data, whether it be rows, tables, table spaces, etc., that impact your ability for production to perform accurately. You've got continuity and DR concerns. You've lost your primary data site for some reason. And in a category of its own, we have malicious activity. Could logically fall into either the data loss or business continuity DR scenario, but it's really worth noting that it could actually result in both scenarios happening. As an example, if you have a ransomware attack, it could steal your data and then encrypt your data files. So you've got data loss and you've got production now. So these are things that keep DBAs up at night. Ideally, we have plans of action and mitigation that might limit the impact of these events. But these are some worst case scenarios. If we focus on having tons of backup space and maintaining backups just for this period, it seems like a waste of resources. So we really need to ask, how can we get more value out of our backups other than simply hedging our bets against some unscheduled production downtime? This is where a modern data management solution knows there can be a great deal of value that can be derived from your backups. Why just focus on traditional recovery, where we acquire a backup, perform recovery, and then return the database to service? There's so many other activities that backup can be used for. We can increase the quality of the code that developers are generating by providing them with a most recent snapshot of production. We can do restore exercises to confirm backups can indeed be recovered and they're valid. We can prove to auditors and compliance requirements that any backup selected in the recovery window can indeed be recovered. We can create environments to troubleshoot production issues, because nobody really wants to be doing their production troubleshooting in their production environment. And another option is you can also create a copy of your production to offload your reporting overhead. And let's use the backups we have to really add value. Now, for recovery considerations, these are all great things to keep in mind to keep your business moving forward and add value to your organization. But what steps do you really need to take in order to make this happen? Well, first, you need to know where this backup's going to be restored to. Is it going back to the same host, i.e. you're doing a production recovery scenario? Is it going to a different target in your data center? Is it going to a DR site? Is it going out to the cloud? How much storage do you need in order to make this happen? If you're talking, a 500 gig database, yeah, you might be able to have that space available on a target in your environment. But if all of a sudden you're looking at, we've got a 300 terabyte database, yeah, that's a different story. Well, the next question is going to become, who allocates that storage? So if you can't get through that toll gate, you've got a much harder time to do a restore. You got to be able to identify the backups that you need. It needs to be able to be retrieved, and you need to be able to stage it somewhere to be able to restore it. And lastly, you need people. People make this happen. So are these people going to be available when you need them? And can they support the activity that needs to be done? So basically, all your recovery considerations boil down to two critical items: time and space. If you lack one or the other, your restore efforts are going to be impacted. So we know what to expect for recovery, but how should a modern data platform address this? Here's some of the key things you should consider. Right? We want data protection that does more with tagging. Right? So anything you have protected should be easy to find. You should have some Google-like features to enable your search. Intelligent tiering. We all know data ages and loses value over time. The backup you took yesterday is a heck of a lot more valuable for production recovery than the backup you took 6 months ago. Modern solutions should be able to leverage that intelligent tiering and seamlessly integrate that into your recovery workflows. You really shouldn't be a PhD in rocket science to be able to use the UI. We need something that's simple, uncluttered, lets you get the job done, without months of training. We really don't want the CEO doing our job, so why should your data protection solution enable them to? We really need granular controls that enable you to limit access down to an object level. And we all know that, every recovery scenario has its own nuances. A one-size-fits-all approach to recovery just doesn't cut it. You need tooling that enables you to really select the recovery option that best fits your situation and really gives you an easy button for recovery. Now, the concept of a recovery easy button is really nice, but is it realistic for all situations? So let's take a look at what recovery options we should have available. First, we need to be able to determine whether we're recovering back to a source on the left or to a different target on the right. Then you've got 4 primary recovery options, whether it be full recovery, mounting a dehydrated copy of the database, table space point in time recovery, or DBA managed recovery, where your solution, data protection solution, provides you with the files you need to do the restore on your own. Now, your modern recovery solutions should be able to cover any one of these. You'll see that one isn't covered, which is table space point in time to a different target. Well, from a logical standpoint, that simply doesn't work because you're talking about a table space that exists in a different database, so you really can't just restore it to a point in time in another one. That would require an export-import. Now, the other thing to see on this is over toward the right. You've got activities that should be able to easily be automated, but you should also have the flexibility to be able to operate them manually. This gives a lot of flexibility to say, okay, we've got a complex activity that's going to require a subject matter expert to do the recovery. Or I've got a periodic refresh that needs to be done. So I don't need to have an SME out there managing that. Let's make it easy and either automate it or integrate it into a third-party tool so that it can make the calls out and automate that deployment or refresh of, say, a lower level environment when we need it. So, give me one moment while I take a quick drink here. If we look at recovery options in relation to time and space considerations I mentioned earlier, you've got 3 major options. We can see the chart. You've got where you can mount or do dehydrated type recovery, where we can quickly recover utilizing local compute resources on a target, and then present the data files to that target from the data protection platform. One-click clone and recovery, where you can select your target, select the point in time you want to recover to, and execute the recovery. And we got to factor in complexity, because as the complexity requirements increase, you may need to consider something along the lines of DBA managed recovery, where that solution is going to stage the files required to do that point in time recovery and enable the data DBA and to execute the in-house scripts to do that recovery. So the chart gives you a rough idea where each of these options can provide value. Do you have a massive data set and really short RTO? You might want to use a mount. Do you have a moderately sized data set where we're talking about gigabytes, not terabytes, or you've got an extended RTO? Maybe doing a clone or recovery exercise is going to be the way you want to go. And as I was mentioning earlier, as that complexity increases, you may have a lot of complex recovery workflows that require manual interaction in order to ensure proper recovery. This really is where a DBA managed recovery comes into play. Let the data protection platform stage the files you need, and then so that you can meet the RPO objectives, and then let the DBA manage the recovery process. I see a few questions coming in. I'll probably hit those as we get closer to the Q&A, so please bear with me. Now, these are all interesting things to consider, but what other options should a modern data protection solution really offer you? So, your modern solution should be capable of cutting through these issues like a hot knife through butter. Things you need to think about with it is you shouldn't have to go on a snipe hunt to try to locate your target. It should be a simple point and click selection. As I stated earlier, you should be able to select recovery options based on the urgency of your needs. When you're looking at non-production restoration, you should be able to assess the level of activity of the environment and determine how you need to restore. Example, do you need to do a full restore where you're rehydrating everything back onto the local file system? Or can you use a mount option where you're working off of a dehydrated set of data files? Do you have specific recovery requirements that might negate the need of an automated recovery? Can the solution enable a user to perform the recovery that is not a subject matter expert on the specific backup tool? Or can the process be integrated into an IT service management tool? Simply put here, if you go on vacation as a DBA, are you really going to enjoy your vacation, or are you going to be having your laptop in tow and your cell phone in hand waiting for that phone call that something's gone down and now all of a sudden you've got to manage a recovery exercise? So, to really kind of hammer some of these points home, let's take a look at a couple quick scenarios. Hopefully they'll help you understand some of the differences you'll see between a legacy backup and some of the modern data protection solutions. All right, so first scenario, lead DBA for an online store. Simply breakdown of it, your production environment crashes at 2 o'clock, leading into the busiest shopping day of the year for you. Root cause was identified by the infrastructure team and resolved by 3:30, but that doesn't really address your database issues. When you start everything up, you find that there's some data corruption and the online sales systems won't come online. And of course, management now is having a coronary because there's a potential of massive sales losses if the system isn't online by 6 a.m. And just to make it a little more interesting, you happened to stay up last night and binge watch some obscure show on your streaming service, and that 2 o'clock call really was poorly timed for you. So, how can you fix this? Well, with a legacy solution, yeah, first thing you're going to do is you're going to stop taking calls. You don't want to be distracted by email. You're going to load up on the rocket fuel. You're going to start searching for your backups. And now exhaustion setting in, and yeah, we'll release environment to the user. So wait, what? Oh, where am I? Oh, wait, shoot, I'm lost. No pressure. And remember, management's wondering, you done yet? Do you have any idea how much this is costing us? So yeah, it can be a little cumbersome. Now, compare that to your modern data protection solution. So you can perform a simple search to identify the impacted database, ensure the database that you need to recover is shut down, then select the recover production. Out of these two options, which sounds good for you? Heartburn or confident calm? Let's look at another scenario. Any of you that work in a regulated industry, I'm sure, are very familiar with this one. It's external audit time. And you've won the auditor lottery, and you've got the auditor that insists that they need to witness the recovery exercise for one of your largest databases. It's over 100 terabytes. And the best part is you thought you were going to be able to sit back and take care of a lot of development items this week. Have been hanging over your head, and developers have been beating you up over. What are you going to do? Well, how do we manage it with a legacy solution? First, you exercise an astounding amount of restraint to not strangle that auditor. Next, we're on the hunt for a target capable of running that 100 terabyte database. And we got our fingers crossed, hoping that the auditor selected an RPO that the backup admin can locate and stage really easily. And we got to hope there's room somewhere to stage those files on the target so that we can do the recovery. And then we'll start the recovery and let the auditor know it should be done in 10 to 20 hours, assuming, of course, they haven't left for the day. Compare that with a modern data management solution, which makes this much simpler. Again, identify the database you want to recover, select your RPO, select a target with the compute resources capable of running the instance, mount a dehydrated copy of the backup on the target, show the database is online and accessible. Depending on your security policies, with solid RBAC methodologies, you could even configure a user for the auditor so that they could do this on their own. So, again, which would you prefer? Heartburn or confident calm? Another thing with this particular scenario is it doesn't necessarily have to apply to just an audit. This is a great way, as I was mentioning earlier, to quickly spin up a production instance that you can troubleshoot production issues. Standing up a reporting instance so that if you need a query-only database to run reports off of, or if you have a CI/CD pipeline, you could integrate a QA environment spin up into that without having to reserve a ton of disk in order to replicate your production workload. So, where do you stand on time? We can, looks like we're doing pretty good here. So we can look at a live mount and maybe even do a little more. So let's take a look. We've got some recommended materials, all of which are linked in the handouts here. And we've got Forward coming up, which is Rubrik's user conference. You'll see a lot of wonderful things there with current customers and things we have in the pipeline that we're working on. And you also will be able to get access to last year's content out of this too if you register. Now, let's look at the Q&A, or actually we'll go into the demo instead of the Q&A. Bear with me while I fire up my screen share. Okay. Now, you'll see that I've got two windows open up here. My gray window here is the source that I'm taking my backup from. Let me get logged into this, and we'll show you something quick. So you can see on this host that I've got a database running. We can confirm the host name and the time that I brought it on, that I ran the check, and you can see that there's no fancy mount points or anything like that online. This yellowish mustard looking nasty screen is my will be my target. If we run the same scripts here, you'll see there is no database running. It is indeed on a different host. You can see that I'm not trying to pull a fast one with the timeline, and you can see that there's nothing mounted. So this gives you an idea of where we stand as a baseline going in. Now, as I log into Rubric, we'll get a quick look at the dashboard here, and then I'll dive into some of the search functionality and how we can get into doing a quick restore on the database. I let that screen sit idle for far too long. Okay, so I mentioned earlier about Google-like search capabilities. You'll see here as I start typing stuff in, it's going to start narrowing my list down. So bang, now all of a sudden, just by using that search item, I've been able to drill down to the specific object I'm interested in, which is this database. I also have options coming down here to hunt and peck further, digging through each server and whatnot. But if I need to get something quick, here's the fastest way to get to it. So what we're going to do once the screen refreshes is we're going to look at the ability to do that dehydrated mount functionality, which in Rubrik's terminology is called a live mount. So in our scenario, you'll see that, let's say the auditor said, I want a restore from, let's say, once the screen refreshes, March 29th. There we go. Should be able to hit here. Now I'm drilling into my recovery options. And they were interested in, let's say, 5:15, and just to be really interesting, they wanted 38 seconds. Point and click, I've gone to a general time range down to the very specific time that I need for this RPO. And now I can just simply come in here and say mount. Another interesting thing of note, as we drill into this, let me go back to my terminal windows. If you notice, on the different hosts, my source has a different installation directory than my target does. So this is what we call a dissimilar cloning or a dissimilar refresh. How does one handle that? Well, first thing we do is, again, we've got this lovely search functionality, so I can narrow down the scope of my host that I want to go to. Quickly found my host. Now I come down here and I can select advanced mount files where I translate, here's where my binaries are located on my target. Put that in there. Now I click mount. Now I've instantiated that recovery. Wasn't going out writing a ton of scripts, throwing a bunch of code around. Was 3 or 4 clicks and I'm up and running. So while this runs, let's take a look quick, and you should see a little bit of a difference here now. When I run this status, I'm still hitting it too early. trying to jump the gun on you and show you stuff that's not ready yet. So you can see here, it's actually mounting channels. So it's for a Linux host, it's creating a series of NFS mounts to simulate the restore. Now you can see here's what it's put online. While we wait for this to finish, we can see that this database is protected. We've got all this little information here, but how does one protect it? Well, this is where our Sla domain concept comes into play. I can come in here, and this is one of the things that's, I think, the real beauty behind Rubric is you get to do a larger SLA policy, right? Because you as a DBA may have different requirements for some of your databases, but as a business, your business is going to say, yeah, I expect this level of protection for objects in, say, production versus test versus dev versus a sandbox. The beauty of this is you can come in here and create an SLA domain that can be applied across all of those objects, whether it be virtual machines, SQL Server databases, Oracle databases, VMs, Linux hosts. Essentially what it's doing is it works on a very basic concept of, let me drill into it so you can take a look and it becomes a little clearer. How often do you want to take backups? And how often do you want to retain them? So for this example, it's taking a backup every 12 hours and then holding on to that particular backup for 7 days. And then you've got a daily that you keep for a month, a monthly you keep for a year, and an annual that you keep for 3 years. If you've got some interesting backup window requirements, so you can only run backups or do other maintenance in a certain time frame, yeah, you can actually set that all up here. So that way the SLA runs in that time. Added feature. You also have the ability from within Rubric to manage archival of these backups. So now, like in this example, we're going to an S3 bucket. Doesn't have to be S3 or cloud alone. We've got Azure, we've got GCP, we've got S3 on this one. It could be an NFS device. It could be a tape. You know, you've got all sorts of options there. Within the UI, you have the option of saying, okay, when I'm pushing this out to archive, do I want it to be true archival storage? Like, do I want it to start really hyper compressing it? So maybe that adds value if I'm looking at Glacier or Glacier Deep Archive. Or do I just want to push it out to a default S3 bucket and then let the intelligent tiering of my cloud provider then manage the age out process of those backups? If you've got a DR or a highly available architecture where you've got additional Rubric appliances in your stack, you have the option to replicate your backups between those disks. So you could say, all right, well, I'm in AMER 2. I want to make sure that I replicate my backups over to my DR site at AMER 1. And then I can come in here and modify how long I want them retained at that DR site. And maybe I only need it for, let's see, we need it for, say, 94 days. Or I can use my arrow and click it down to 90. So we can get that granular with it. And then you would click next, gives you a solid review of what you've got. And you'll see here that because I made a change in the retention, it shows me exactly what changed. So if I was modifying an SLA that I've got assigned across my environment already, I can come in here and modify it. It'll tell me exactly what's changing, and it gives me the option to apply that change to any of my existing snapshots. So if you've got backups that you've already taken and you've had a policy change that you need to maintain, yeah, you're able to do that here without a massive level of effort on your part. If I wanted to implement this, I would click update. It would update my SLA. Now what you've got is you've got that broad brush for your SLA policy. Think of this, I don't know if any of you have had the, what I'll loosely term joy of painting a room. So you've got two different things that you need to do when you paint the room. You're not going to take a little 3-inch brush and paint an entire wall. That's going to take you forever and a day, and it's going to look like garbage when it's done. Odds are you're going to have some type of roller to get that big area done, and then you'll use your little 2 or 3-inch brush to cut in along the corners of the wall. This policy that you just created is that roller on the wall, so it's going to cover a lot of your options. And then as you drill in, let's go this way since I showed you the search option before. I can drill in, I'm looking at Oracle databases in this scenario, could very easily look at SQL Server. Very similar look and feel, that's all common across the board. As you drill into each one, you'll see minor differences based on the features that each database vendor offers. So I come down to my host, and now I can see what's protected. I could theoretically set my host such that the host itself has an SLA domain assigned to it, and then make sure any database that gets spun up on that host automatically inherits it. So there's the application of that broad brush, right? Using that roller to get the paint on most of the wall. With this particular database, this is my example of where I needed to cut in on the corners with my little 2-inch brush. I came into this one and explicitly assigned an SLA to it. And once the screen refreshes, I can show that to you. So you can see right here, there's an SLA domain that's specifically assigned to this one. I can come up here to manage protection. And if this was inherited, right, which is right there, I could click that, and then it would inherit whatever the, I could change it so that it inherits whatever the host has assigned to it. Or I could come in here and say, you know what, yeah, that broad brush doesn't work for me here. This database has some particular nuances that I need to address in a very specific way. So I've got a special SLA that deals with those type of settings. So I can set that here. Now, because I'm dealing with an Oracle database, we have archive logs. We also have the ability to say, okay, you're dealing with an Oracle host that you've identified. How often do you want to back up your archive logs? You want to back them up every 15 minutes? Do you want to back them up every 2 hours? And once you back them up, how long do you want to retain those? Well, that's going to differ based on how frequently you're cutting your backups, what your retention requirements are. So you can actually set this so that it either sticks with the SLA that you're assigning up here, where it's keeping stuff local for 5 days and then shipping it off to archival. Or you can say, you know what, yeah, I want to keep it local for 30 days or whatever works for you. And then once I had that set, I could come down and I'd be able to click next. There's advanced settings here, but we won't look at that because that's specific for Oracle stuff, and I want to keep this a little broader base. Since I'm not changing anything, it's not highlighting this for next. Then I can select this, click next. It'll show me that summary window that we saw last time to confirm that I want to make this change, and it'll apply it to, if this was already protected, it'll apply it to any backups that it's already taken. So let's say you spun up a database quick because you needed to get a new test environment online quickly, and in your rush to get it online, you forgot to add it to the backup scheduler and get the scripts updated for it. So, oh no, it's not protected. Well, with Rubric, it actually will be. Because we're protecting the host, it's going to pick up that broad brush SLA domain, and anything that gets done, it'll make sure that it's getting those backups according to that SLA policy. Now, if you come in and you decide that, oh, you know what, I need to be more granular, yeah, you totally can. You set it up, and like I showed with the last one, when you make changes to the SLA assignments or anything within the SLA, it'll prompt you, oh, do you want to make this retroactive? Do you want it to apply to any of the backups that we've already created for this particular environment? And you can go ahead and do that. Now we've gotten through that, we can see that the database is now mounted. So it took and ran through everything and brought this database online. If I run this script again, now we can see, find where my mouse is, that the database is online here. Whereas before, the last run, we saw that the mounts were up, but, and of course I don't have enough scroll, but the database wasn't online. And if we check it over here again, just to make sure I'm not trying to pull the wool over on you, you can see that, yep, database is running here, still no fancy mounts on this host. So it's mounted the backup files over NFS, because we're on Linux, and presented them and essentially done a dehydrated kind of restore. So you're not using the local disk to fire up an instance. So all it's using off this instance is the compute resources and a touch of storage to maintain any changes that happen. Now, the thing I mentioned changes. This can also be fully read-writable. So let me we can come in. I can execute this script here. And you can see the data files are all pointing to those rubric mount points. So it's grabbing that image file copy and actually using it as your data file location. Whereas if we look at it over here, you'll see that it's actually running off the local disk. Now for the Oracle folks out there, if we were running in an ASM environment, yes, you would see that it's compatible with ASM, and it'll do all the associations with your disk groups. The other thing I was telling you was it's fully read-writable. I ran through here and added several rows to a table in this database, and it committed them. So now, not only do you have a database online that you can query against, it's fully read-writable, so you can actually execute everything you need if you, say, doing a destructive Q&A test, if you wanted to use this for like a development environment that you refresh regularly. The options abound for what you can do. If the one thing that obviously you want to watch out for when you're doing this kind of scenario, anytime you're mounting file systems onto your host over another protocol, whether it be SMB, NFS, etc., you're not going to get that same level of performance that you see out of the tier 1 disks. So what you run on this database in gray, where you're doing I/O, is going to be faster than what you're running for I/O against the database in yellow, simply because disk is local. So you don't have as much lag because you're not going over the network to try to do I/O. Now, last thing to show with this is this is lovely that you can do this and whatnot, but how do you clean it up? You know, do you have this big maintenance activity that you've got to do it? No. If you're in the database window, you can see you've got a live mount option here. So you can click on it here. Or you can see on my little menu here, I can go down to live mounts, and it shows me all my live mount options. So if there were SQL Server DBs that I wanted to see who's got those mounted, I can see that here. My Oracle database is the one that I'm interested in, so I'm coming here. Well, now, if I'm done with it, I see that McElhenney bozo mounted this for no apparent reason. I don't know what that guy's doing. He's just out making my life miserable. Well, I talked with him to find out why, and he's done with it. He just couldn't be bothered with shutting it down. So I can just come in here and unmount it. And what that's going to do is now it's going to go through the process of shutting down that database and then unmounting all that NFS storage. So at the end of the day, when you go and you look at it, it's going to look like there wasn't a database on that host. All that's going to exist are your binaries and any of the internal logs, like your audit logs or your alert log information and any trace files that may have been generated when you were running the instance in an Oracle example. And once it's done, it'll actually disappear from here. And then it'll be as if it wasn't there. I don't know why I SQL plussed. So that's really the demo. Now I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let's take a look at some of the questions.
Absolutely. Yeah. Really cool demo. We got a lot of good feedback on that. Thank you so much for taking time to do that. It's always so cool to see Rubric in action. So first question that came in, I guess, is about, I'm not sure if it's managing Rubric or clients, operating systems that can be backed up with Rubric. So I guess first on the management side, is Rubric all browser-based when it comes to management or command line API?
Well, you've got Rubric as a solution is API-based. So anything you see in the UI can be executed from command line. It's really robust in that perspective. We have, if you go out to Rubric build, let me actually pop that up and I can show it to you. build.rubric.com. We have several SDKs. SQL Server guys will really dig the PowerShell SDK. If you've got some folks that are Python guys, I say guys, that are Python DBAs or just, really Python savvy, the Python SDK is extremely powerful too. We've got a larger base, obviously, with PowerShell, given the size of our SQL Server customer base. So you see a lot of stuff there, and we've got an entire GitHub repository that you can get access to be able to see what are people doing, how are they using it, and converting the API calls you're seeing in the interface into simple commands you can execute from a command prompt.
Very nice. Very nice. And then when it comes to what Rubric can protect, what are the limitations around that, or what can it back up, I should say?
There's all sorts of options there. I mean, we cover the gamut. We're trying to, we don't want to be a one-trick pony. So you've got various databases that we protect with what I was showing you is what we term our snappable solution. So that's more of an integrated type solution. So you saw the list that was going down that side menu where I was showing some of the live mount options where you had VMs, SQL Server databases, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a bunch of stuff that we have really enhanced protection for. And for the ones that we don't have that super granular protection on, you can go the route of what we call our managed volume solution. And that is where we essentially present you an NFS mount that you can stage on a host, and then you send API calls to that to say, okay, unlock this mount so that I can write to it. And then once I'm done writing to it, lock the mount back up. So that way while the mount may be visible on a host, unless you're explicitly unlocking it, which requires a login to the back through the Rubric API, you can't touch anything that's there.
Got it. Okay. And then there's a question here about, I would rephrase it as, where can Rubric run, or where does it run? Does it run on premises? Does it run in the cloud, or both?
There's two flavors. There's what we call CDM, and that's on-prem. And then we have Polaris, which is our cloud-based platform. For a lot of the database protection, for on-site stuff, I heavily work on the Oracle side with the CDM product. Now, the Polaris side of the house, that has a ton of integration points from metadata analysis, security. We've got what's called Sonar, which does predictive analysis on activity anomalies, and Radar that detects change in the data. It's incredibly powerful with what it brings to the table. So you have two different flavors, and you can protect across various locations.
Nice. And then there's a few questions here that I would rephrase as simply, what makes Rubric unique? You know, they say, I have X backup product now. Why should I consider Rubric?
This is one of the things that really interests me, actually, and one of the reasons why I came to Rubric. Rubric, if I was to break it down, there's two words that really surmise this. It's simplicity and security. You saw the UI. All it took to get that up and running was Rubric has what we call an appliance, which is a 2-unit, 4-node pizza box, for all intents and purposes, that you slide into your rack. You get that in, you get it on your network, and you're up and running. Most of our implementations have Rubric up and running and actively protecting stuff within hours. So that level of simplicity to get it up and running, to be able to set up that initial SLA and then discover things that you need to protect, is astoundingly fast compared to some of our competitors. From a security perspective, especially when we start looking at our snappables, we're talking about a almost entirely air-gapped solution. So when you look at, all right, I need to do a backup, and we're talking about, let's say we're doing a SQL Server backup. You've got a service that's running on your host, and all comms are going through that service. And that service is managing an encrypted channel between the service that's running and the Rubric host. So you've got an encrypted pipe that your data is going through, whether you've got network encryption running or not. So it's really stable there. Once it hits the Rubric, what we call a brick within Rubric, once it hits the brick, it's then held in an immutable format. So it's read-only. Nobody can modify it. Nobody can play with it. Nobody can delete it. It's there until your policy tells it that you're done and we're going to phase you out. Those were some of the big things that just, for me, were eye-popping. It's like, this is fantastic. Especially Absolutely. When you consider how ransomware is working, and how now we're starting to see ransomware spread from just being a, for lack of a better term, a quote-unquote Windows problem, to now you're seeing ESXi variants that are hitting virtual machines. You see ones that are growing in intelligence where they're actually breaking in through Windows, and then they're scanning for Linux hosts that they can get onto that Linux environment on you. It's scary, and when you look at the costs associated with it, it's really concerning. And to have a solution that can actually minimize the impact of that activity is huge.
Absolutely. Yeah, ransomware is just such a huge problem. Here's a good question about databases and protecting those with Rubric. They ask, does the database or does the DBA have to quiesce the database, or is that process automated through the backup with Rubric?
With the way Rubric's running, Rubric is using your native tooling. So in an Oracle world, because I'm had my most exposure with Oracle, so it's just easier for me to talk to the Oracle realm. It's using RMAN. So everything with it's going to go through your RMAN level commands to say, okay, I need to run my backup. Once I get it out there, it's going to do my initial backup of level 0. And then just like Oracle's maximum availability architecture dictates, they want you to do the incremental merge, incremental forever type backups if you want to maximize your availability and minimize your downtime in the event of recovery. So anything that needs to happen to make sure that's stable and your backups are complete, it's going to be managed within RMAN itself. So you're not going to have to explicitly do anything to prepare your data for that backup and make sure it's clean.
Excellent. Excellent. I like that. And then what about, we talked about ransomware a little bit, but this question from Phil, he's asking how Rubric can specifically help to protect us against a ransomware attack.
Think of Rubric as your last level of defense. All right. Obviously, you're going to have a security team in there who, I'm going to say obviously, who should be making sure that you've got those layers of protection in front of it, right? So you're creating that protected kingdom where, you've got a tree line way out well beyond the castle, and then you've got areas of the grounds where you can easily see and archers can reach. And then you've got a moat and a drawbridge and huge castle walls. And then as you get further in, now you're focusing more on the critical crown jewels for the kingdom. And Rubric is saying, okay, let me make sure that we are the last line of defense around those crown jewels so that in the event you get breached, we've got you covered so that you can get yourself back up and running as quickly as possible. So with that immutable backup, right, what a ransomware attack will typically do is it'll come in and it'll sit on your network for quite a while, right? They want to see what's going on. They may be grabbing some data off quietly, so that way they can try to hit you with a twofold attack where now all of a sudden I've stolen a bunch of your data and I'm going to make you pay for it if you don't want me to dump it on the dark web. And then I'm going to come across, with a big right hook, and I'm going to encrypt all your production databases. So now you're dead in the water. So you can either pay me now or you can pay me later when you can't get back online. When you hit that later scenario, what Rubric enables you to do is now you can, if you need to scrub that hardware or you need to bring stuff up on a DR site, Rubric has all of those backups so that you can then rebuild quickly, knowing that the ransomware hasn't infected those backups because of the immutable format that they're stored in.
But we are running out of time today on our webinar schedule slot here. So I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap up. We got a ton of great questions from the audience. We didn't have time to get to all of those, but I do appreciate everyone submitting such excellent questions for the presentation today. And of course, Sean, I really appreciate your live demo as well. That was really cool to see Rubric in action. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the time. I really appreciate the opportunity.
And thank you to everyone who joined us on the live webinar today. I hope that you learned a lot and have a great day. Before we go, I do want to announce our Amazon $300 gift card winner. That's going out to Lauren Dormer from California. Congratulations. We'll reach out to you to deliver that prize. And we'll also be reaching out to our best question prize winner after the event via email. I want to remind everyone, check out all the excellent resources over at Rubrik.com. There's a ton of information on backing up Oracle databases and other databases with Rubric, top 20 questions to ask when modernizing your backup, Oracle data management with Rubric, And then Rubrik's always doing some really cool virtual demos and Camp Rubric. So make sure that you check those out over at the Rubric website. Thank you, everyone who joined us on the webinar. Have a great day. See you next time. Bye-bye.